When you buy an iPhone, you're not just buying a phone, you're buying a feeling. The feeling of being safe, the feeling that your information is protected, that your life, your photos, your messages, your location, your habits remains private. Apple tells you that privacy is a fundamental human right, they say. What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. You've seen it in ads, heard it in keynotes, read it on billboards. But what does that really mean? Is it a promise? Is it a shield? Or is it a sales pitch? This documentary is about that promise. What Apple tells us. What actually happens behind the scenes, and what privacy truly buys you when it's part of the product. Apple has built its modern identity around one word: privacy. From the moment you set up a new iPhone, that message is everywhere. You're asked for permission before apps access your camera or your microphone. You get notified when an app is using your location. You see those pop-ups asking if an app can track your activity across other apps. You're given options to limit data sharing. Settings menus are filled with toggles and explanations that seem to say, "You're in charge." This design, these choices create an impression that Apple is fundamentally different from other tech companies, that it's on your side, that it doesn't want your data. It sounds good, and to some extent, it's even true. Apple doesn't run an advertising empire like Facebook or Google. It doesn't build its business around data brokerage or profiling. That's money comes from devices, not from selling your attention. And that's exactly why privacy has become part of Apple's brand. It's not just a value. It's a competitive edge, a way to stand apart in a digital world full of surveillance, a way to say, we protect you, the others don't. This protection is reinforced by certain features Apple loves to highlight. One of the most important is on-device processing. That means, in theory, your personal data is handled right on your phone. When you use Face ID, your face data isn't sent to Apple's servers, it stays stored, encrypted, inside your device. When you use Siri, many requests are processed locally. When you browse your photo gallery and see automatic memories or groupings, your phone is doing that work, not a cloud algorithm. Another major feature is app tracking transparency, or ATT. This system forces apps to ask for your permission before they can track your activity across other apps and websites. Before, apps could use a unique advertising ID to follow you around the digital world. Now, that's optional. If you tap Ask App not to track, the app loses access to that ID. In fact, studies have shown that after 8, most users opt out. That change sent shockwaves through the advertising industry. Then there's iCloud Private Relay, a feature that acts like a simplified VPN. When you browse the web using Safari, Private Relay hides your IP address and encrypts your traffic. That way, websites can't easily build a profile based on your location or browsing patterns. Even Apple itself says it doesn't see what you're doing. Mail privacy protection is another tool. It blocks email senders from knowing when you open an email or where you are. It stops invisible pixels that silently report back to marketers. There's also the privacy nutrition label in the App Store. Every app now has to disclose what kinds of data it collects. Is it tracking your location? Is it accessing your contacts? Is it using your usage data for advertising? All of this adds up to something powerful, a user experience that feels respectful, a brand image that feels responsible, a platform that appears to give you more control than ever before. And to be clear, Apple does offer more privacy by default than many competitors. You don't have to dig through endless settings to disable tracking. You're not constantly targeted by third-party ads. You're not funneled into an ecosystem that sells every move you make to data brokers. But here's the critical point. All of these tools, all of these promises, they're not the whole story. They tell you what Apple limits, but they don't tell you what Apple still does. They show you the protections against outsiders, but they don't always reveal how the inside works, because while Apple gives you tools to block others from tracking you, it still gathers a lot of information about you for itself. That's the side of the privacy story that's rarely discussed, not the data that goes to advertisers, but the data that stays within Apple's own walls, the kind that's used to make the system work, to optimize performance, to sync your devices, to recommend features, to build and sell the Apple experience. In Apple's world, privacy is not a wall that stops all data, it's a filter, a redirection. Of how data moves and who controls it. This is where the myth begins to crack, because while Apple is clearly doing more than most to protect users from external surveillance, it's still running an internal system, one where data flows in specific directions, for specific reasons, and almost always with limited visibility from the user. You don't see all of it, you don't always know when it happens, you can't opt out of everything, and in some cases, you simply can't function in the Apple ecosystem without handing over certain data. That's what we'll explore. Next, you've heard the promise. You've seen the features and device processing, app tracking, transparency, iCloud privacy. But now, let's look at what Apple still collects. And why. To use an iPhone, you need an Apple ID. That account is more than a username. It's your passport into Apple's world. Your ID connects your devices. It links your photos, your notes, your messages. It tracks your iCloud backups. It handles your subscriptions. It enables FaceTime, iMessage, App Store downloads, Find My, and more. Even if Apple doesn't sell your data, it still uses it heavily to keep things synced, to improve services, to deliver the seamless experience Apple is known for. When you back up your phone to iCloud, your photos, your messages, your documents, they're encrypted. Yes, but Apple holds the encryption keys for most of that data, which means they can access it under certain legal circumstances. End-to-end encryption is now available for some categories, like iCloud keychain and health data. But for full device backups, it's still optional, not default. When you activate your phone, Apple records your device's unique ID. That ID is persistent. It ties your physical phone to your Apple account. It also helps with features like continuity, the system that lets your messages follow you from iPhone to iPad to Mac. You may never think about it, but Apple also gathers telemetry. That includes crash logs, performance stats, battery data, screen time, app usage. You can toggle some of these off in settings, but many forms of operational data collection remain active, because without them, Apple can't detect bugs, measure reliability, or deploy targeted fixes. These logs may not include your name, but they include identifiers, things like your model, your location, the time the event occurred, the OS version, the network condition. Then there are push notifications. To receive messages instantly from apps. Your phone contacts Apple's servers. Apple knows which apps you use when they send notifications, and which device is receiving them. It doesn't read the content of your messages, but the metadata, the who, when, and how often is all there. When you use the App Store, Apple tracks what you search, what you download, how often you update. These insights help them suggest apps and optimize the store's algorithm. But they're also useful for building internal profiles, not to sell you ads, but to understand how you engage with the ecosystem. Even seemingly simple features like typing can involve data. Apple's keyboard includes optional input data sharing for auto improvement. You can turn it off, but again, it's opt-out, not opt-in. Safari, the browser that blocks third-party trackers by default, still sends data back to Apple. Safe browsing features ping Apple's servers to check for malicious links. This protects users, but also reveals browsing patterns at a network level. The Mail app now hides IP addresses from email senders, but to do so, it routes your content through Apple's system. In doing so, it adds a layer of privacy against marketers, while also handling your activity through Apple's infrastructure. All of this data is used to improve reliability, security, and user experience. But it also builds a detailed behavioral map of who you are, how you use your devices, and when. And that's the key. Apple's privacy system is built around limiting outside access. But internally, Apple knows a lot. It doesn't need to know everything you do in every app because it already sees how you move through its system. It knows when your battery drops below threshold. It knows when your iPhone last backed up. It knows when a FaceTime call fails to connect. It knows if your iCloud space is full and which device is taking the most of it. It knows if you're updating often or skipping versions. It knows which accessories are paired, how much storage you've used, what country your Apple ID is registered in, and through services like Siri, Spotlight Search, or Apple Music. The company gathers additional preferences, the words you search, the songs you like, the queries you ask. This isn't secret. Apple discloses it in privacy reports, and some of it can be turned off. But most users never read those documents, and even fewer truly understand how interconnected everything becomes. Because privacy isn't just about what data is collected, it's about who has access and how it's used. Apple's model is often framed as privacy first and compared to companies built on ad revenue. It is, but that doesn't mean data stops flowing. It just means that Apple keeps it for itself. And when you use services like iMessage, FaceTime, Apple Pay, and Health, you're placing trust in the system that your data is not being exploited, that the protections are working, that the trade-off is fair. That may be true, but it's still a trade-off. The average user might think, I use Apple, so I'm private, but that's not how it works. You are less exposed. Yes, but you're not anonymous. You're not invisible. You're not outside the system. You're just inside Apple's system instead of someone else's. And that system needs information. It needs to sync it, needs to coordinate, it needs to know, so it can function, predict, adapt, and offer that seamless, elegant experience that made you choose Apple in the first place. So what you get is not silence, it's structure. Not isolation, but integration. Not freedom from data, but a framework where data is managed, filtered, redirected. You're not being sold, but you're still being seen. And for many, that feels like a fair deal. So now we arrive at the question that matters most. What does all of this actually mean for you? For the person using their iPhone every day. For the one browsing Safari, texting on iMessage, taking photos, using Apple Maps, syncing files with iCloud. Let's be clear, there are real benefits to Apple's approach. You get meaningful control over how apps use your data. You can decline tracking. You can limit access to your location, your microphone, your contacts. You receive regular security updates. You're protected by hardware encryption, by Face ID that doesn't leave your device, by machine learning features that analyze your behavior on device. Not in the cloud. This isn't marketing fluff, these are real protections. Compared to many alternatives, Apple offers a higher privacy baseline by default. Most users don't have to touch a setting to be safer here than on platforms that rely on personalized advertising, and that's important. It matters because privacy should never be something only tech-savvy people can achieve, but even with these protections, the system isn't perfect. There are trade-offs. There are assumptions built into the ecosystem that are easy to overlook, because while Apple does a lot to shield you from third parties, it still requires a large degree of trust in itself. Your data might not be sold, but it is still used not to advertise, not to target, but to keep you inside the ecosystem, to encourage you to subscribe, to sync, to upgrade. To help Apple understand what works and what keeps you coming back, and that's the deeper layer of Apple's privacy story. It's not about avoiding data collection altogether. It's about controlling the flow. It's about being the only one with access. It's about designing a closed environment where the rules are written by one company and you agree to them, sometimes without even noticing. When you take a photo on your iPhone, it's stored in iCloud if you've enabled syncing. That photo is encrypted. Yes, but the encryption key often lives with Apple. Unless you've manually enabled advanced data protection, If your phone is lost or broken, Apple can help you recover your content. But that means it holds part of the recovery key. When you send a message on iMessage, it's end-to-end encrypted. That's good, but the backup that contains that message, that might be stored in iCloud without the same level of protection. So even strong encryption doesn't guarantee complete privacy if your entire ecosystem isn't locked down. When you use Apple Maps, Apple says it separates your identity from your navigation history, but your device still contacts servers to download routes, traffic data, search results. And even if that information isn't tied to your Apple ID, it still travels, it still leaves traces. You may not be shown personalized ads in the same way you are on social media, but Apple still runs an ad network. The App Store and Apple News both show ads. And those ads can be targeted based on your device type, your language, your region, your downloads. You can turn off some of this, but by default, it's enabled. And unless you go looking, you might never know. The same goes for Siri. While Apple shifted much of Siri's processing to the device, some requests still reach Apple's servers. When you ask for information, or dictate a message, or set a reminder, your voice may be stored and reviewed unless you disable it. Again, it's all about defaults, and most users never change them. Apple is not the villain in this story. They have, in many ways, pushed the industry forward. They've raised expectations. They've made privacy mainstream, but they've also branded it, packaged it, turned it into a selling POINTA competitive advantage. A reason to upgrade. Privacy is no longer just a human right. It's a product feature. It's something you pay for. It's something that comes with trade-offs, buried in system design. And that's the real lesson here. Apple doesn't promise total invisibility. It promises control. But control doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean disconnection. It means trusting the system and the company behind it to make the right decisions on your behalf. In a way, Apple's pitch is honest, just not always complete. You are safer here than in many other places. You are less tracked, less exposed, less profiled, but you're not untouched, and you're definitely not anonymous. You are known by a company that makes billions by keeping you inside its garden. By a company that tells you it doesn't want your data, while quietly using it to optimize, personalize, and retain. The truth is simple. Apple doesn't make you invisible. It doesn't sell you true privacy. What it sells is the feeling of privacy, the sense that you're in control. And for many people, that's good enough. But feelings aren't facts, and believing something doesn't make it true. The promise of privacy should never stop us from asking deeper questions. What data is really being collected? Who has access? Can I opt out? Am I being informed? Do I understand the trade-offs? If the answer to any of those is no, then privacy isn't a guarantee. It's a negotiation, a fragile balance between protection and profit, between user trust and corporate goals. So the next time you hear, what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone, take a moment, think about what that really means, not just in theory, but in practice. In the settings you never touch. In the backups you rely on. In the permissions you grant without thinking. In the cloud you sync to. In the identity you build tied to a single ecosystem. Because, in the end, Apple doesn't make you private. Apple gives you tools. It gives you control, but only within the boundaries it defines. The rest, it's up to you. And if this message made you pause, even for a moment, share it with someone else. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe for more content like this, because digital privacy isn't just a tech issue, it's a personal one. And the more we understand it, the more power we truly hold.